Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. We're going to review the Lenovo Legion Go 2. Believe it or not, it's been about 2 years since the first one released, and this new one has been improved in just about every single way. It's definitely not a generational leap, but there are some significant improvements to the screen as well as the controls, which honestly I think are probably some of the most important aspects of a handheld PC. And it still has all the same hallmarks that you would expect from a Lenovo Legion Go 2, like detachable controllers and a big 8.8-inch screen. Under the hood, we're seeing some improvements too, about a 15 to 20% performance gain over the previous model. In many ways, it feels like the Legion Go 2 is everything that the original owners had been asking for: an improved display, better controls, and a little bit more power. But given how much AMD charges for these new processors and world events, which are making things more expensive, this has a significant price increase. It's almost double the price of the original Lenovo Legion Go. And so in this video, we're going to go over all the details of this new model to see whether or not it's going to be worth this significant price hike. This is definitely going to be a long one, so grab your favorite snack and drink and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's jump into specs and then we'll move into pricing. Now, there are two different CPU models for the Legion Go 2, and the one I'm testing here today is the Z2 Extreme. This is essentially a rebranded version of the AI HX370 AMD chip that's been around for about a year and a half at this point. However, the Z2 Extreme is making its debut in the Lenovo Legion Go 2. The AI Z2 Extreme, which is also a very similar processor, but with some AI features, that's the one that's in the Asus ROG Ally devices that are also coming out later this month. These are not the most powerful processors in the world right now, but they are the top-of-the-line handheld processors that they have on offer from AMD. The Z2 Extreme model that I'm reviewing today also comes with 32 gigs of RAM, clocked at 8,000 megatransfers per second, and also a terabyte of internal storage. Of note, the M.2 drive inside this device is a 2242, but it has space for a 2280 if you want to upgrade it yourself. The big star of the show with this handheld is the display. It is 8.8 inches with a resolution of 1920 by 1200. That gives it a 16 by 10 aspect ratio. It's essentially a 1080p display, but a little bit taller. Now, what really sets it apart is it's an OLED panel with a variable refresh rate display that goes all the way up to 144 Hz. To top it off, the variable refresh rate will kick in at 30 Hz and go all the way up to 144. What this means is that as long as you're hitting at least 30 frames per second, your gameplay is going to play smoothly, even if it's going to fluctuate a bunch. The battery has also been upgraded. It's now 74 watt-hours, which is almost double as what it was on the previous model. But of course, additional battery does mean additional weight, so now it is 920 grams as opposed to around 850 on the previous model. That moves it from about 1.75 pounds to now about 2 pounds altogether. So this does make it one of the heaviest handhelds on the market right now, but they do have some mitigations in place, like the detachable controllers and a built-in kickstand, so there are some ways that you can make it not so heavy on your wrists. As far as connectivity, we've got Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3 and 2 USB 4 ports. Those can be used for video display out. And I did test the video out. It works great up to 4K and 60 Hz. Out of the box, the OS is going to be Windows 11 Home, but you will be able to load things like Linux as well as the Xbox experience sometime in the future. Now, like I mentioned before, there are two different chipset models for this device. The one that I do not have, the cheaper model, comes with the Ryzen Z2 chip and 16 gigabytes of RAM. It's kind of confusing which chipset is which, but the Z2 is essentially the same as the Z1 Extreme, which is the same chip that we had in the previous Legion Go 1. So the big change between the Z2 and the old Z1 Extreme models isn't really going to be performance, but rather that new OLED panel and these new controls. But it is worth noting that this is a significant price increase. $1,100 for the cheaper Legion Go 2 model. That is $350 more than what you can get with the Z1 Extreme model right now. So what this says to me is that this OLED panel was probably very expensive to manufacture, and some of that cost is now being pushed over to the customer because we've got a $350 difference. When we jump up to the model that I'm reviewing today, the Z2 Extreme, the price goes even higher. It is a $600 difference between the original Legion Go 1 and the Legion Go 2 Z2 Extreme. And so I think this new price is a cascade of a bunch of events. The new screen, the new controls, the fact that it's upgraded RAM to 32 gigs from 16, and then also that AMD price structure. You know, the HX370 chip, which this one is based off of, is also very expensive, around $1,000 to $1,200 for a handheld with this processor. So I'm not surprised at this high price. And then also, of course, world events and just, you know, things being more expensive right now in 2025. It's all kind of coming together right now with $1,350 for a handheld that was $750 with the previous model. So this is going to be a major focus point in this review, is how is it that this thing is $600 more expensive, and is that new price increase justified? So let's start with the device itself and everything that's the same and everything that's new. Of note, this was sent over by Lenovo for review, and I'm sending it back after making my videos on it. I'm going to do a review right now and then an emulation showcase in a few days. But like with all my reviews, all opinions are my own. They're not seeing this video ahead of time, and no money was exchanged in any way. Now, besides the handheld, you will get a couple other things. You have the FPS mode puck. We'll talk about that later. We've also got a 65-watt power supply, and this looks to be almost identical to the one that they had previously. I like that it is relatively compact. We've also got a soft shell case, which is a lot smaller than the original one, which I always thought was pretty darn big. A nice thing here too is it's got a little slot for the puck underneath, so you can just kind of open this up via Velcro and then slide that inside. I know it's black, so it's kind of hard to see. My camera has a hard time picking it up, but I do like this little case. I think it is better than the one they had previously. Now, fundamentally, this is the same device as the Legion Go 1, but with a bunch of improvements. It is still basically just a PC tablet that has detachable controls, kind of like a Nintendo Switch, but to the max in the sense that it is a handheld PC. But I think for the most part, if you are familiar with the Legion Go 1, you're going to be right at home with the Legion Go 2. It's essentially the same device, just with those additional improvements. It still has those weird top-firing speakers, but thankfully the audio is better. We'll test it later. And one thing of note is that the power button now is a fingerprint sensor too. That is a welcome addition. On the bottom, we do have some design changes here. So the headphone jack and the SD card are now down here. I'm not really sure why they did that, but they are now relocated. Same thing with the USB-C port. It used to be like over on the side. Now it is more centered, but they do offer a dock, and the dock actually just connects up top. So not that big of a deal either way. The big change are the controls, and I think that these are better in just about every single way. If you're not familiar with this whole setup, these are detachable controllers, and they work in several different ways. Now, much like with the original one, getting these off is actually still a pain in the butt. So they've got these little buttons right here that are basically detachment buttons, and from there you have to basically pop them down from the bottom, and it's not as natural and as smooth feeling as something like a Nintendo Switch, especially the Switch 2, which is really satisfying. This still has that same kind of clunky structure. Now, honestly, I can't fault the Legion Go 2 for that, more so the Legion Go 1, because these actually work with the original device as well, so you can use these on the previous tablet, and so they're just using the same design that they had previously because they're trying to make them compatible. So if anything, I just kind of wish Lenovo went back in time and made a better connection mechanism, but as it stands right now, at least it does work backwards compatible. Now, there are a couple things you can do with these controllers once you have them detached. The first would be just to kind of play them like this. You know, if you want to separate your arms while still gaming, you can do that. And these are super lightweight, and they are still comfortable to hold like this. Lenovo also sells like a controller attachment for these too, so you can attach them to that. I think it also charges the controls at the same time, and there are also a bunch of 3D printed options out there on Etsy. Beyond that, it also has what they call FPS mode. So the idea with this is the same as the original one, is that you grab that puck and you can now slot the right side controller inside of it. Now, on the previous one, it was just magnetic, but this new one actually has a clip on it, so you have to unlock it to take it apart. And so that's kind of nice in the sense that it is very sturdy now. And so the idea here is that you can flip this into FPS mode, which is going to use this little IR sensor underneath, and now this essentially is going to be a mouse. On top of that, you can pull off the right analog stick, which now does not have a pogo post or anything, so it's a lot more comfortable than it was previously, and you can use this as like a dedicated mouse, and then you can also still use the left analog stick for your character movements. The idea is that you would have the best of both worlds, where you have really precise aiming, but then also movement with the analog stick as opposed to a keyboard. Another nice addition is that we have this scroll wheel, so if you need that in a certain game, you've got that access while playing in FPS mode. To help with your FPS experience, you've got these additional buttons, M1, M2, M3. And so this is essentially going to be your shoot button, and this is your like aim or zoom button. And you can also use these. This is going to be like your start button if you need to get into the menu. And so it actually works out pretty well once you get used to it. But personally, I just don't play this way. I've tried on my other Legion Go, but yeah, it just doesn't really sit well with me. But that being said, if you're interested in an FPS mode and you liked it with the previous one, I think it is a lot better now. The buttons don't stick out as much, but they still are really tactile and responsive. And yeah, I think this is a good mode. It's just not one for me. And this is still the only handheld that has this FPS mode. I think it is actually pretty cool, even if I don't use it much myself. Now, one of my major complaints about the previous Legion Go is that I felt like these buttons in particular were just like always in the way. Like when I was playing the device, I would just accidentally press them, even though they are disabled when you're not in FPS mode. It was something that just kind of bothered me. Like it felt like I was pushing these buttons all the time. And I will say it just doesn't happen as much with this new controller setup. I think these buttons just don't stick out as much, which is a big factor. But then also just the overall ergonomic shape of this device means that all of my pressure and weight go down here. And so I'm never really pushing down too much in this section of the controller. So I think overall, like big picture wise, with the features and the overall like controls of it, it is a much more comfortable controller and a big improvement. Even the feel and texture has been improved. We've got this nice bumpy grip on the back, which I love. And then we've got a softer plastic on the front, which feels kind of rubbery, but not super smudgy. And so overall, I think that just everything feels better. It feels a lot like the Legion Go S in terms of material. Let's talk about controls, starting with the analog sticks. These are much bigger. They feel full size now, and they are more fitting with a larger device. They also have this nice metal band around the edges, which makes them feel super smooth. They are relatively light in terms of tension, and I know some people didn't like that. I don't really mind it. I think it feels pretty good. And I also like the cap on these as well. It's got like a nice texture around the edges of it, a little bit rubbery, but still grippy. And then it is also concave. And so in general, I think these are some of the better analog sticks I've ever seen on a handheld, nice and smooth and very precise. The placement of them is just about perfect as well. I had no complaints when it came to just ergonomics and holding the device and playing, first-person shooter and other action games. The D-pad is also a big improvement. The previous one was kind of a cross style, but this is a shield style, like an old Sega Genesis controller, and it is awesome. It's got a nice kind of like rubbery feel to it. It feels kind of old school, but it is also very precise. It works great with games like Contra. I can press down and rocket left and right, and the character barely moves, which means you're not going to get accidental diagonals. This feels just about perfect for me. Same thing with a precision platformer when I'm trying to alternate between cardinal points, up, down, left, and right, but then also the diagonals. I want to hit those when I specifically want to, and I've had no problem with playing games like Celeste. And then finally, a Street Fighter game, when you're trying to prioritize diagonals, it also works out really well. I can roll this with absolutely no problem. This Shield D-pad is, again, probably one of the best I've ever seen on a handheld. It's got this great mix of classic retro as well as just kind of feeling a little bit modern as well, because it's very tactile and precise. On the right side, we've got these face buttons. These are rubber membrane buttons, and they are actually pretty darn quiet and tight, but they also take a little bit more actuation force than the previous model, and more so than a typical console controller. So I have to actually push this down a little bit harder than I would expect. Now, I think that this will probably break in over time because it is using a rubber membrane connection, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's not to the point of being fatiguing, but it does take just a slight bit more effort than previously. We've also got a touchpad down below, which you can use to basically navigate through windows, but I gotta be honest here, I actually have this disabled in the settings. I'll show you how to do that later. And there's two reasons why I have it disabled. Number one is the fact that I was getting some ghost inputs with my palm, like it would just barely touch it right here, which would register as a mouse touch, which would sometimes remove the controls of the game I was playing because it thought that you had like plugged in or using a mouse, but I wasn't. I just accidentally pressed it. So that's one of the reasons why I disabled it, is because right here in this corner, I was still getting some ghost touches when playing my games. The second reason why I just don't use the trackpad is because we have an 8.8-inch display, which means I can just use the touch on this just fine. I can use the touch keyboard or the mouse. It is so big that I just don't feel like I need to have a mouse input. It works well enough with the touchpad alone. Now, beyond just the, game input controls, we got a bunch of other buttons too, including these two up here. These are your two like Lenovo Legion buttons. This one will bring up what they call Legion Space. By default, it'll go to the storefront, but here you can use like their library to, see all of the games you have installed across all your multiple different storefronts. And then you have your settings and controller settings and stuff too. We'll talk about this one later. Now, you also also can bring up like the quick menu, and this will allow you to do things like adjust the brightness and the volume, and you can change out your performance profiles on the fly. You can also use these as hotkeys, so if you press this button and like say the Y button, it'll change out your different performance profiles. You can also do things like bring up an on-screen keyboard by pressing Legion Go and B. So you've got some hotkeys there, which is pretty neat. And if you ever need to know which buttons do what, you can press the Legion button and the LB button, and this will bring up a menu and tell you what all of the hotkeys are, so that makes it pretty easy. Now previously on the other controller, our start and select buttons were down here, and that annoyed me to no end, but thankfully in the software you could change them to make the start and select up here, which is what I got used to on my original Legion Go. What they've done now is they've actually put the start and select down below. Now this is the same design that they used with the ROG Ally X, and I remember with that device it really messed me up because I would just naturally press these buttons thinking they are start and select, and I found that with this controller it's not that big of a deal. And it really comes down to just the overall size of this device and the size of my medium-sized hands, because when I naturally want to press start and select, those are the two buttons right there that just come right to my thumb. And so I never actually press these ones accidentally. I have to make an effort to press them while playing just because these controls are so large. So I think that the placement here, even though it is less than ideal because it's kind of confusing to know which one is which, is very natural for me and my medium-sized hands. If you've got bigger hands, it might be a problem where you press this one naturally, but for me it's worked out really well. Now these buttons down below now do a different purpose. This one will just go to your desktop, which is handy, and then this one brings up a task manager. So if you want to swap between different windows, that is also super handy too, because sometimes when you load up a PC game, it doesn't come to the forefront. Sometimes it loads in the background. So this gives you the option to kind of swap between them if you need to. The shoulders and triggers also feel good. They are really big and roomy, and I like the fact that we've got a fair amount of travel right here with the triggers. And so in general, I've just really enjoyed this overall feel. It feels like holding like a big boy handheld. It's just like really big and crunchy controls. Okay, on the back here, we've got our cooling and then also a kickstand. Now, this one is not quite like the other one where it doesn't go back as far. It's also not as tall, but in general, I think it works pretty good. It's good solid, like, it feels like a hard plastic here. So if you are going to be playing it in tabletop mode, I think it'll still work out pretty well. In addition, on the back, we've got 3 programmable buttons that you can use when using the controller as an actual controller. So they're Y1, 2, and 3. We can program those in the software. So honestly, that's about it when it comes to the controls, which I think are a big improvement. Like, they just feel a lot better. I think the overall design is better. They've got a more rounded off section right here. It closes off here in a better angle too. And so even though this is a heavier device, it feels very comfortable to hold despite its weight. The way I've been thinking about it is that if I just hold it on its own, where I'm not resting my arms on something, it's a little bit too heavy for me. It's like about 2 pounds. That's pretty darn heavy to play for a long gaming session. Instead, I found that resting my elbows on my knees or maybe leaning back and resting against an arm of my couch, that all works a lot better. And so that's the way that I've been holding this device, and I find that perfectly comfortable. And so putting this all together, I think these controls are a massive improvement, especially over the previous model. They're not perfect. They still kind of feel a little bit utilitarian, just in the sense that we do have buttons everywhere for all the various different modes you can play it in. But I think that just from a practical perspective, we've got a lot of options here, and it is as comfortable as they could probably make it. And it's a night and day improvement over the original Legion Go controller, which I always felt was like too squared off and uncomfortable. It was a bit sharp along my hands, and then also these buttons were too easy to press down on. Now, I fixed a lot of that by buying a 3D printed grip. I've talked about this in my other Legion Go videos. This snaps into place and rounds out everything, and also disables all those buttons so you don't accidentally press down on them. So this is how I've been using my original Legion Go for, about a year and a half at this point, and I think it's just a lot better. And so I don't feel like I actually need a 3D printed grip with the new controls. They are just that good already. So really, whoever made these new controls on the Legion Go 2 deserves a raise over at Lenovo, because I think that this is a huge improvement over the first one, to the point where I was not a huge fan of the first device, and this one makes it feel that much better. And like I mentioned, they are backwards compatible with the original Legion Go. They're not a perfect fit, and that's because this device is slightly larger, and so they do kind of stick out along the edges a little bit more, but they feel so much better than the original controllers. I've heard that they are going to sell these controllers separately at some point. They're not up on their website just yet, but if you own the original Legion Go, it might be worth doing that upgrade just as a treat to yourself, because they are that good. When the first Legion Go came out, I envisioned like this whole ecosystem of different controls for this device, because if they're detachable, that means you can throw a bunch of other stuff on there. But unfortunately, Lenovo has not made an upgrade over these 2 years until now. And it's a welcome change, but I do still kind of hope that they come out with different control schemes and different accessories. I think that would be a really neat ecosystem to make. If you look at the Switch and the Switch 2, there are people already making all sorts of controls and grips and whatnot for those devices. And I'd love to see something like that in the PC handheld space too. The other significant improvement on this device is the display. I already talked about the specs, but let's talk about how it compares to others. Let's start by comparing it against the original. Now the dimensions are the same, 8.8 inches, but the resolutions are different. It was a 1600p panel on the original, but they've actually downgraded that to 1200p on the new one. Now there was always kind of a weird mismatch between that high resolution display on the old one and the power to push that many pixels. You could never really play games at that native resolution unless it was super lightweight. So to me, a 1200p resolution is not necessarily a downgrade, but just a better standard where you can play games without having to fiddle around with the settings. Most of them will play at 1200p. However, we are losing out on one nice feature of that 1600p panel in that we could use it for integer scaling when playing 800p games. So that was always kind of my go-to, is that I would play a game at 800p resolution and then use different tools and whatnot to upgrade it to a 1600p integer scale. It would still make the overall image look kind of chunky and pixely, but it was nice and balanced. And so I really like that. I thought it looked a lot sharper. I did a whole video about all this stuff. I'll leave it linked down below in case you have no idea what I'm talking about. Either way, yes, these are different resolutions, but same size. Now, the other major difference is that the old one was an LCD panel, but we now are working with OLED. And the big thing I learned when comparing them side by side is that the old screen is still very, very good. In terms of saturation and contrast ratio, yes, the OLED panel looks better, but it's not a wide margin. In fact, between the two, I still think they look both very good. If anything, I would say that the Legion Go 1 has a cooler temperature compared to the other one, which looks a little bit warmer. Now, once you start messing around with the brightness, you can see a pretty big difference between the panels. So for example, at 100% brightness right here, you can see that they both get kind of equally bright at the peaks, but it's also a lot more washed out on the LCD panel compared to the OLED one. The new panel gets nice and bright, but retains all of that nice balance. And so I think that if you are playing in a brightly lit environment, I would much rather play on the OLED one. Same thing in a dim environment. If I go down to 0% between the two, you can see that the Legion Go 1 panel is a lot brighter. This means that I would much rather play the Legion Go 2 in the dark as well. I think the best way that I can summarize how good this panel is to compare it against the Steam Deck OLED, which is one of my favorite OLED panels, but it is at a much lower resolution. It's only 800p. It's also smaller. It's only 7 inches. But what you can see here is that the temperature is about the same between the two, and the colors are also nice and poppy on both. And so yeah, it feels like the Legion Go 2 is like an upgraded version of the Steam Deck OLED panel in the fact that it's larger and a higher resolution. Now at 100% brightness, there is a difference. I think the Steam Deck is brighter, but in general, I usually just play both of these at around like 70 to 75% brightness, and that's perfectly fine in most scenarios. So the fact that the Steam Deck OLED is brighter isn't really that big to me because these are not devices that I would play outdoors. And when dropping it down to 0%, they're about at the same level of dimness. So these are both excellent devices to play in the dark as well as in bright environments. So long story short, yeah, that's kind of my assessment of the screen, is that yes, it is excellent in terms of the visuals, and it really just kind of feels like a bigger version of the Steam Deck OLED screen, which is definitely not a bad thing. Finally, one other screen comparison is with the GPD Win 5. Now, these are kind of completely different devices in terms of like overall size and form factor, but what I wanted to emphasize here is that the GPD Win 5, despite being a quite large handheld with a 7-inch display, is just absolutely dwarfed by the Legion Go 2. It's also surprising, but the Win 5 is actually 30 grams heavier than the Legion Go 2. This is a very chunky device when you have the battery connected. I did a whole review of this device. I'll leave that also linked down below in case you want to check it out, but we will talk about performance between the two later because the Win 5 has a more upgraded processor. It's about twice the performance of the Legion Go 2, while still only being about $250 more expensive. Okay, now let's talk about audio, and a couple notes here. Number one is that it is top firing audio, which I think is less than ideal because it kind of just goes up into the room instead of right directly into your ears. However, the audio profile is a lot better than the previous one, which I always felt was like super muffled and really kind of underwater sounding, to the point where I had to use third-party apps to adjust the audio. Again, that's in that other review that I talked about earlier, which is linked down below. This new one sounds a lot better to me, to the point where I don't think it actually needs any additional software. So let me give you a listen right now. So my take is that it is a lot clearer. I can hear the high, mid, and low stuff really easily, but it's not at that same caliber of the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, and even the MSI Claw, which I think all have better audio than the Legion Go 2, but I still find this to be acceptable. Now let's talk about benchmarks and performance. I've got quite a few observations here. Now let's start with a synthetic benchmark. We'll use 3D Mark TimeSpy. For context, the original Legion Go gave me a score of 3441 when pushing it to the max. So this is with the custom profile and pushing it to, I believe, a 35 watt TDP. And yeah, this is about what I would expect, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 with this era of chipset. Now with those same settings and with the Legion Go 2, again pushing it to that custom profile of 35 watts, I get a little bit over 4,000. Again, this is about what I would expect with the HX370 chipset or the Z2 Extreme as it's branded here. And that's going to give you a 17.76% increase over the original Z1 Extreme chipset on the Legion Go 1. So that's what we're looking at, a 15 to 20% performance gain when playing on this device over the original. And earlier I mentioned the GPD Win 5. This one has that Strix Halo chip inside of it, and so this one is a lot more performant. You can see it is about 200% better than the Legion Go 2, and a 238% increase over the Legion Go 1. So if you're looking for pure power, then the GPD Win 5 has that here with this chipset. It's the only handheld on the market right now that can give you this type of performance, but of course it has a different display and its own share of issues. Like I mentioned, the review is going to be down below, but I did want to show off that yes, if you're looking for pure performance, the Win 5 has that in spades. Now let's do some in-game benchmarks. We'll start with Returnal. Now, I'm not a huge fan of doing these benchmarks just because sometimes they do not actually reflect what it'll be like when playing a game, but it does give us some data to crunch when comparing it against other devices. So starting with the Legion Go 2, I'm running it at low 1200p settings, and with no FSR or other upscaling technologies, this is just running clean. My average frame rate here in these settings is 33 frames per second. Now, compare that to something like the Steam Deck. This is an older processor with a weaker GPU, and this one also can't run at 1200p. It's an 800p display. So even running this at 800p with the same low settings and no FSR or anything, I only get 24 average frames per second. So you definitely got a lot more performance power over the Steam Deck in the sense that you can play at a higher resolution and still get better performance. Now the crazy thing is that the Z1 Extreme must be really optimized for this game in particular because it actually outperformed the Legion Go 2, and again I think this is probably an optimization thing. But the Legion Go 1 got me 39 frames per second on average with these same settings, 1200p low with no FSR. Again, I don't actually think that the Z1 Extreme is a more powerful processor, it just so happens to run this one older game a lot better. In a real life situation, the way I would play this game is at 1200p and low settings, but I would also turn FSR on, and that's going to give you an average about 40 frames per second, which is about the same as the Z1 Extreme with those same settings in actual gameplay. So what I'm seeing here is that this game runs perfectly fine, and yes, it's about the same as the Z1 Extreme, likely due to optimizations in the game as well as with the drivers. Now, if you're looking for pure performance, again, the Strix Halo CPUs are going to give you an advantage over the Z2 Extreme. For example, here with the GPD Win 5, running it in medium settings in 1080p resolution, which is the max of this display, it gets an average of 80 frames per second compared to 33. Okay, and our final in-game benchmark is going to be Cyberpunk 2077. This is a game that is well optimized on handheld, so it's a good test bed. This time around, we're going to use the Steam Deck preset and then just adjust the resolution based on the panel itself and try to get as apples to apples as we can. So with the Legion Go 2, I got an average frame rate of 45.55, so that is pretty darn good, and it is better than the original Legion Go 1. The older one got 38.86 frames per second, and that is a 17% improvement with the Legion Go 2 over the Legion Go 1. And I think that's a more accurate reflection of just overall performance and what you can expect if you are going to bump up from the original to this new model. The Steam Deck also runs this game really well at 40 frames per second, but also bear in mind it's at a lower resolution. It's only an 800p with the Steam Deck preset. So yes, this game runs perfectly fine on the Steam Deck, but it is going to be a bit blurrier. And then finally, the GPD Win 5 also wanted to rub it in that it can get a lot better performance at a 1080p high settings. Here I'm getting a frame rate of 81.99. And so yeah, big improvement here if you're just looking for performance. For my part, I found that Cyberpunk 2077 is an excellent game to play on the Legion Go 2 because we got this big display, it's OLED, and there's a lot of contrast like ratio happening in this game, a lot of darks and brights, and so it's just beautiful to look at. And yes, we can get an average of, somewhere around like 40-ish frames per second when playing with the Steam Deck preset at 1200p. So yeah, I think that's overall a pretty good experience. One other note about performance and benchmarks is that the device will ramp up and get kind of loud if you are going to be pushing it pretty far. It's about the same overall volume as the original Legion Go. The ambient noise in my studio is around 43 decibels, but when I kick it in, it goes up to about 67. Let's do a quick audio test. Overall, I think it does an excellent job with cooling. It doesn't get super loud. I never really saw it get hotter than like 72 degrees Celsius when running any game. And then also the audio profile on its own is not annoying. And so I don't think this fan is hard to listen to. Okay, now let's talk about the software that we have available. We already talked a bit about the Legion Go, but I wanted to really dive into the whole controller section because I think this is actually pretty neat. Of note, this whole suite of software works just fine in the Legion Go 1, so these improvements are there as well. So within the controller section, you have the ability to map your buttons, and you can actually have additional different profiles. So you can set this up both with the regular gamepad mode and FPS mode, where you can have the buttons do whatever you would like. Now, this is somewhat cool, but then also a little bit limited too. The long and short of it is that you can almost change any button to be whatever. So say, for example, this button, the view button or the select button, we can go in and we can change this to be a different controller input, a mouse input, a keyboard key, something from the numpad, or a combination of different keys as well. So you've got the ability to do up to 5 keys at once, and then of course, basically any other input you can think of. And so that gives you a wide variety of adjustments if you want to, especially with like these 2 buttons down below. You can basically assign them to whatever you would like if you don't like the default settings. The one thing you cannot change are these 2 Legion Go buttons up above. Those unfortunately won't even get highlighted, so you can't change those in the software. One other limitation is that I have not figured out a way to make a per game profile. So say, for example, this game, I wanted to use like a different button profile. There's no ability to do that. You can just uninstall or remove the app, but you can't actually go and make an assignment to an actual controller profile. And I think that would be really important when playing like a first-person shooter game in FPS mode, where you want to have the buttons do different things depending on the game, and you should be able to assign that on a per-game basis, but they don't have that in the software, at least not right now. Now also in the setting, you can adjust your lighting. You can change it to whatever you would like. You've got a bunch of different lighting effects, and then you obviously can also change the different colors and the brightness too. So I think that overall, if you do like having RGB lighting, you've got all the options you would need right here. In addition, if you want to tweak your overall controls, you've got joystick settings to adjust the dead zone, and then same thing with the triggers as well. You can do the same thing and adjust how far you need to push it down before it registers at the 100% push. You've also got gyro settings options if you're into that kind of stuff. So the way you can do it is basically have an activation button, like say, for example, the left trigger, and then have it mimic something like your right analog stick. And so that's essentially how it works. And you can also make it simulate a mouse if you want as well. You got a lot of options here, kind of like how it is on the Steam Deck too. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I do appreciate that they have that all within the settings. You can also do controller calibration if you need to reset anything. And then also under the more section, there's a couple things worth noting too. For example, you can adjust your controller vibration strength. I like to have mine on the weak section. And then this is also where you can turn off that touchpad. This is where I did that down below. And then finally, you can manually do a new update, but I found that anytime there is a new update, it'll just prompt me anyway. Now in the regular settings, we've got a couple different options here, including the performance section. So you've got quiet and balanced and performance modes. And these essentially, and don't quote me on this, but it's like around a 5 to an 8 watt TDP with quiet. it's around like a 15 watt TDP under balance, and performance can go up to 25, but you can also do custom, and this you can set to whatever you would like. By default, it's going to go all the way up to a 35 watt TDP. And in a moment, I'm going to try a bunch of different games at these different profiles, but I just wanted to kind of give you a baseline of what about they're going to be in terms of performance and battery drain. Now, beyond the full screen Legion Space app, we also have the ability to use this side menu, and this is the one that I use most often. And a lot of this is not going to be a surprise, but you can adjust things like your performance profiles, you can adjust your fans here as well, and then you can do things like brightness and volume and change your resolution and your refresh rate, and then also turn on a frame monitor. So if you need to see any of your specs, you can see that right here in real time. You can also adjust some of the other core stuff, like, changing out the controller vibration or turning off the touchpad. So often you do not need to go into the main app. You can just grab it all from the sidebar. So in the end, I think the Legion Go software works pretty well. I mean, we can jump in and make adjustments as needed, but then also that quick menu is really handy if you just want to change out performance profiles. But then also bear in mind, you can use the hotkey too, like this 1 plus Y together will change out your performance profile. So you can kind of cycle through them that way too. So now let's do some PC game testing, starting with the lightweight stuff and moving our way up, and we're going to adjust the different performance profiles and then talk about battery life along the way. So starting with the lightweight stuff, we can play these games in what they call the quiet thermal mode, and so this is going to run around 7 or 8 watt TDP, and it's going to drain the battery about 13 watts, and I would expect about 5.5 hours of battery life with these lighter weight games. And also bear in mind, I'm using the full 1200p resolution here. So if I wanted to have even more battery savings, I could play this game at like 800p instead, but I think it just looks amazing on this OLED display at the native resolution, so that's what I'm using here. Now, outside of those really lightweight games, a lot of the other games are going to require you to use a higher performance profile like the balance mode. And so something like Cuphead or Parking Garage Rally Circuit, those ones work the best when you're using it with that balance mode. This will pull anywhere up to like a 15 watt TDP depending on the game and the settings that you have, and I would expect anywhere from about 4 hours of gameplay down to around 3 or so. And so if you're looking for 3 to 4 hours of gameplay for some lightweight and medium to weight games that are going to be playing at a 1200p resolution, then yeah, I think this is the setting for you. It's going to give you a nice smooth frame rate. It may not be, a full 144 hertz like this panel can use, but you will be able to get pretty close to that, and the VRR will kind of smooth everything out as well. So let's do a couple examples at this lightweight tier of what you can expect in terms of battery life depending on the setting that you're using. We're going to use Silksong as our first example, 1200p default settings throughout this entire testing suite, and the first one I'm going to try it at that quiet mode. This will give me an average frame rate about 45 frames per second, so it is not going to be as smooth as 60, but you're not going to have like judders and hiccups and whatnot because of that VRR display. So this is absolutely playable to me, not quite like an excellent experience, but still playable, and this will give you about 5.5 hours of battery life. Now let's say you don't have 5.5 hours to play, but you want something that's just a little bit more consistent and smooth. And so let's bump it up into the balance mode, but then cap it to 60 frames per second. It's going to take about 18.6 watts to play at this level, but that's going to give you about 4 hours of gameplay time. So here we are with, losing about an hour and a half of battery compared to playing it at a lower frame rate, but we're going to have that nice consistent 60 frames per second. Now let's say you don't have 4 hours to play, you've only got 3 hours, and so you just want to play as much as possible and you want to have the best experience. So in this way you can play with that balance mode again, but now we're going to unlock that frame rate to go all the way up to 144 hertz. And this time it's going to run great. Like if you really want to have that high speed gaming, it is right here. But you are going to lose some battery life. It's only going to be about 3 hours of battery life as opposed to 4 or 5.5 that we saw earlier. And the nice thing about these lightweight games is I did not adjust any of the visual settings. I'm just changing the frame rate. And so it really depends on how much time do you have to play and how fast a refresh rate you prefer to play with. One more example on the lightweight end will be Hades 2. So playing this at 1200p default settings here, and I can play that in the quiet mode. So it's going to, lower that TDP down to around 7 or 8 watts. And I'll get an average here about 40 frames per second. Still playable, still going to have that VRR kick in to make it pretty smooth, but it's not going to be like as super fast and zippy as playing with a higher frame rate, but you will get about 4 hours and 45 minutes of gameplay. If you're looking for a much faster response time, then obviously you can change that too. So if we push it into the balanced mode here and then unlock the frame rate, we're looking at around 130 frames per second here, but it is going to give us a little bit less than 3 hours of battery life. So you are losing, somewhere around 2 hours of battery life to have that higher refresh rate. But again, it really depends on how much time you have to play and whether or not you want to play with this specific setting. Now, moving it up from there, there are some games that just will not function properly at that quiet mode, so you'll probably have to play them in balanced mode no matter what, and maybe even in the performance mode, so let's talk about that. For games like Portal 2 and Sulaco, these are a bit more demanding, so I would play these at balanced mode and just kind of let the frame rate go where it wants to because we have that VRR. And yeah, you're going to look at an average about 2.5 hours of gameplay when you play it like this. Beyond that, there are going to be games that run the best in the performance mode, which is going to be close to a 25 watt TDP. So a game like Whisker Squadron Survivor, for me, plays the best there at 1200p medium settings. That'll give me a little bit over 2 hours of gameplay altogether. Another game that falls into this category is Stray, which is surprisingly hard to run on some PC hardware, including the Lenovo Legion Go 2. So this one at 1200p medium settings will run at about 40 frames per second, but again, it's going to cost you about 2 hours and 15 minutes or so of gameplay time on this battery. Now, once you get into say, AAA style games, this is going to be a lot harder to run, especially on this 1200p resolution. So let's take Resident Evil 4 as our first example. 1200p medium settings with FSR turned on. So that's going to be basically running it at 800p and then upscaling it to 1200p. And I still think it looks pretty good. I saw an average about 40 frames per second with these settings in particular, but I had to push it into the custom mode, which is that 35 watt TDP, which is going to drain the battery quickly. So this is kind of a worst case scenario. We're looking at 1 hour and 25 minutes. And that's how it's going to be for a lot of these high end games, where if you push it to a 35 watt TDP, it is going to take about 53 watts of battery drain, which will again give you an average about an hour and a half. And like with all these handheld PCs, there's a bit of a give and take, where you have these excellent visuals on this bigger display and an OLED panel, 1200p resolution, but it is going to require more battery, and so pushing it to the max, this is the worst case scenario, about an hour and a half. So my reason for showing off this worst case scenario is to kind of give you an idea of how bad it could be depending on how you're playing. And in general, yeah, my recommendation would be to use a 1200p resolution, adjust the settings accordingly, and then, look into using something like DLSS or FSR to use an upscaling technology to make it look a little bit sharper without being so taxing on the device. And for me, this is kind of the sweet spot if you are looking for the best visuals and best performance and highest frame rate with these more demanding games, but just expect about an hour and a half of battery. On the other hand, if you're willing to make further compromises, for example, if you want to drop down the resolution to say, for example, 800p, still keeping FSR on, you can actually get a lot better performance here, but it is going to make the visuals a little bit more muddy. So for example, here with Marvel Spider-Man, the average drain here is 32 watts as opposed to around 53 otherwise, and so that's going to give you nearly an hour of additional gameplay time. Instead of 1 hour and 23 minutes, we now can get 2 hours and 16. The graphical fidelity is not going to be as good, but it really depends on how much time you have to play, and if you've got over 2 hours of time, then this might be the better setting to use. Either way, I hope this performance section just gives you an idea of what to expect from this chipset as well as overall battery life. Now, at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I'm going to do an emulation showcase as well, and so I'm working on that right now. It'll be out in a few days, so we're not going to do any emulation stuff in this video in particular. We're focused on PC gaming, and I'll give you a showcase of all that other stuff here very soon. And really, that's about it when it comes to overall testing of this device. So let's wrap up, talk about what I like and what I don't like about the Legion Go 2. So by far, the number one thing and the best improvement here is that screen. It is so good. 1200p resolution, 8.8 inches, OLED 144 Hz, and variable refresh rate. I think it is kind of like a dream screen. The other major improvement are these controls. I think that they kind of revamped everything. Even though it kind of looks the same, it feels completely different. The buttons, the analog sticks, everything just feels a little bit better, especially that D-pad too. So yeah, overall, I love these new controls. The audio is better. It's not to the point of being great, but I think it is good enough, and I think that's a big improvement over the first one, which I thought was extremely lacking. The software improvements over the past couple years make it a much cleaner experience too. It's pretty intuitive to jump in in and change your performance profiles and even your button mapping. It's got some little limitations to it, like no per game profiles, but overall I still think it's a lot better than it used to be. Another big strength of the Legion Go 2 is that we've got a lot of options. You've got detachable controllers, so you can kind of, prop this up with a kickstand and do all that other kind of stuff. And then you have FPS mode if you're into that as well. And then of course you can just use it like a regular handheld PC, or you could also dock it and use it like a lightweight desktop PC. So you've got all those same options here. And I think it works out pretty well in making this a very versatile handheld. But of course it's not perfect, so I do have some negatives. The first one is like my big negative, the others are kind of nitpicks. So number one is that price point. Like, it's just crazy. It's $13.50 for the high spec model that I'm reviewing here today. As much as I like this handheld, I hate how much it costs, to the point where I do not see myself buying this one at all. To put that into context, I bought the first Legion Go 1 with my own money. I thought it was reasonable at the time, and Lenovo, even though they had offered to send me one, they weren't going to get it to me in time. And so I decided, you know what, I'll just buy it myself, no big deal. This one, I'm not buying. Like, it's $13.50, even though it is a really nice handheld. I think my Legion Go 1 still works perfectly fine. What I really want to see is Lenovo selling their new controllers for the original Legion Go 1, because I'm going to be the first person in line to buy those. But right now, that's my next nitpick, is that, the accessories they have on offer don't even mention the ability to buy the controller separately. So I'm hoping this comes in the future, but you never know. For a device that has detachable controllers and the potential to have its own little accessory ecosystem, I really still feel like Lenovo is kind of holding back too much and not offering these additional accessories. And then finally, my last point is a bit of an existential point, in that it doesn't really feel like a 2. It's been 2 years, and yes, they are rebranding this as the Legion Go 2, but it's not a generational leap to me. Yes, it's got a better screen and got better controls, the software is a bit cleaner, and it's giving you about 15 to 20% performance improvement, but man, none of that to me is a generational leap. It's just kind of an iteration at this point. I see this more as a Legion Go 1.5 than a 2, just because it is not a generational leap. And so maybe we have to wait for the next one to get a big performance jump as well. I'm just not seeing it in this one. So in the end, if you're asking whether or not I recommend the Legion Go 2, I think it really comes down to this one key, in that this is a wait and see handheld. And that can be taken in many different ways. Number one, you can wait and see whether or not the price will go down at some point. So if you're patient enough, we know that these devices always go on sale eventually. So if $13.50 is not a good price for you, it might reach that on its own. It's also probably worth waiting to see whether or not the new operating system experiences are going to improve it even further. Things like official SteamOS or the Xbox experience may actually make this worth the price point at some point. So the way I see it, unless you are a stickler for having this particular panel, I still think it is probably worth getting the Legion Go 1 and then getting the new controls once they are sold for that device. That kind of gives you the best of both worlds at a significantly lower price point. The Legion Go 2 is the device that people have been asking for. They wanted this particular screen, they wanted improvements to the controls, but here in 2025, it's going to cost you. And as far as we've seen so far, it is $13.50 to get an experience like this. Whether or not it's worth it to pay that much to get the device that many people asked for is really going to come down to you and your budget and what you're looking for in particular. For my part, I'm going to stick with my original Legion Go, and I'm just going to wait until they sell these controllers as an additional accessory, and then I'm going to buy them up and put them on my old device, because this to me seems like a better use of my money and my time. Without question, this panel is a big improvement, and we are also seeing better performance with this new chipset, but to me, it does not justify that $600 price increase from the original one at retail price. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. This is an excellent handheld that comes in at a price that's a little too steep for me, but if it's in your budget, you'll probably have a great time with it. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful. We will see you next time. Happy gaming.